we are going to be talking about getting started with Apple School Manager. And really, as you can tell, we've got a panel of experts, both from Jamf and from Apple. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand things off to Dave Stallmarsh, who's going to be moderating the panel. If you do have questions, that is absolutely acceptable, and we'll be taking those. We do have a couple of microphones set up where you can come up to them and ask your questions there. So without further ado, here's Dave.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming in. It is a much bigger room than I was anticipating. I was upstairs, and when I saw what room it was, I was a little wow. So since we are spread out, if you could do me just a quick favor, because knowing the audience really helps myself, and I'm sure it'll help some of our panelists with who we're talking to, and very quickly, since you've been sitting down for a long time, I won't take much time. Could you stand up for a second, please? Promise you'll be sitting very quickly. Honest, no jumping jacks. I was a math teacher, not a calisthenics or a PE teacher. If you are with a K-12 or a higher ed organization, stay standing. Everybody else, please sit down. Outstanding. If you're using Apple School Manager in your organization and or like Apple Classroom, remain standing. Otherwise, please sit down. Wow, okay. If you're using Apple Classroom without Apple School Manager, please sit down. I'm keeping an eye on you. Okay, great. Fantastic. Apple School Manager, not Apple Classroom without. Apple School Manager, but not using Apple Classroom at all, please sit down. Fantastic. Thank you all very much. You can all sit down now. Thank you for going with me on that one. That helps me. For today, we will spend a few minutes with some preparatory questions. I'll just let you know, as a former IT director in several school departments and as Jamf's evangelist, I travel around the world meeting our community. And while I talk some, I listen more when I'm out there. I talk a lot more when I'm here, but out there I listen a lot. And I've heard a lot of questions around Apple and the products and services and capabilities they have and how they've improved over the years since I started decades ago. And we have some experience here from the product marketing side and product management, that perspective, which is really interesting to me. But then we also have from the side of who's out there helping the schools. And so I'd like to introduce our panelists to get started. Kelly Watkins-Conrad, former support person and SE, Systems Engineer Extraordinaire here at Jamf, that really is my go-to person. Welcome.
Thank you.
Steve Regaleski, right? Consultant engineer with Apple, out of Boston area. We've probably known each other back when I was a customer too. Welcome. Right. Frank Chen from Apple. Product marketing, all things Apple School Manager and related in that area, and that's that perspective that I think is very helpful too, that you get an opportunity to hear from. Same with Mike Devins, our product manager for Jamf, particularly on Apple services.
We'll share that applause.
Did I get that? Did I miss anything there?
Nailed it.
So the bottom line for me is I like to, and I'm more of a qualitative kind of person. The quant side, the numbers, they're great, but I like to hear perspectives and see what things are going on. So we have an idea where we should be going, what they're hoping to do, and in some regard, what we're seeing out in the field. We'll spend a few minutes with some questions. Like I said, I was starting to say, yesterday we had a customer advisory board. I heard some great questions related to all the services Apple have. I've heard some questions. I'll start off with some of that. And then I'll like to open it up if you have some specific questions. We have some microphones in the middle, and you can just line up, and I'll kind of give you a cue for that if you have some kind of help me along. Otherwise, I have a giant list to go from, which I think they'd rather hear from you. Right. Before I get started, and I mentioned basically what their role is, but I'd like for each of you to give us a more example. A title doesn't mean a whole lot. What are you doing on a day-to-day basis? Who you're interacting with, and why is it good for me to have you here? Kelly.
All right, so as Dave introduced me, I'm Kelly Watkins-Conrad. I'm a systems engineer at Jamf, and I work primarily with our education folks, both K-12 and higher education. And the conversations I have on a day-to-day basis are how can I help schools integrate Apple products into their environment, and Classroom and Apple School Manager come up on almost a daily basis for me now.
Excellent. And Steve, consultant engineer, help us out with what you're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. So as a consulting engineer, I work with our systems engineers at Apple that work with all of you out in the field, both in the US and across the globe, to take feedback that you're sharing of your experiences back up to product marketing. And I also have an area of focus by working with Jamf really closely.
That's what I knew you had an area of focus, and it's that Jamf specifically and that experience.
Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. And Frank, welcome.
Yeah, good to be here. So what we do on a daily basis is working with folks like Steve here on the CE team, working with customers, understanding what you guys need, what you guys want, what problems are we going after, how do you solve it, and working with our engineering teams and defining what do we build, how do we build it in a way that actually helps all of you. And so it's a pretty interesting process at Apple to do that.
Excellent. Michael. And congratulations, Michael, on your second child last week, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you. So at Jamf, I work with the product team, and specifically, I focus on our Apple integration. So that can be the zero-day stuff. That's also the integration with services like Apple School Manager, DEP, VPP, and all of those Apple-specific technologies. That's obviously a really important part of our product is the integration with the Apple ecosystem. So I sort of live and breathe these technologies and try and help the teams translate those into valuable functionality for, in this case, the education customers, but all customers.
Excellent. And so now, as a former IT director, we know that during the summer I was usually on vacation, right? This summer I was off in Haiti, so, didn't really keep up on things. Maybe I was a little too busy to keep on things. School started. I've gotten through the crisis at the bus garage and the kindergartners finding out where they need to be in the student information system, and now it's October and I have time to pay attention to what Apple's done new. I would have loved to have said that I've really kept on it all, but I know there's some great new things. Apple School Manager particularly has some new additive capabilities to it. Frank, if I wouldn't mind starting off with what's new that we should be aware of that maybe we missed over the summer as school is now finally settled in a bit?
Sure, happy to explain more. So for those who don't know, Apple School Managers, we call it the one-stop shop for IT, for everything to manage your devices, content, and people. And this past summer, really in May, we actually came out with a new Apple School Manager out of preview, finally, and where it has a brand new look. We made it a lot easier to utilize it, as well as performing what we call bulk actions. And so if there's jobs that take a long time, we actually have now a background process that actually handles that for you. We've introduced PowerSchool integration for any customers using PowerSchool 9.0 and later for kind of an API-ish integration with Managed Apple IDs and PowerSchool. And we've actually implemented simple passcodes, right? So now you can actually set your own initial passcode for any Managed Apple ID, and then you can actually make the distribution of those Managed Apple IDs and passwords much easier for your students and staff. And so we did a lot, and more is coming very soon.
Excellent, thank you. And I know I want to come back to the PowerSchool SIS thing, but there's some other stuff this summer, and I'm learning a little bit about some because I'm playing with some iPads. Steve, the idea that, the iPads, most of the stuff I purchased was in schools. We have a lot of schools that have iPads that maybe came from another group, got donated. What's new around that area?
Yeah, so what we released just a couple of weeks ago with tvOS 11 and iOS 11 is the ability for institutions to add any device that they purchase through another channel, whether those were purchased by a PTO organization. Perhaps you went down and bought one device for a superintendent, either at the Apple Store or at Best Buy, and you want to add that into DEP. You can now go ahead and do that using Apple Configurator 2.5.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much for that, by the way. Kelly, we've had things up and running. I know you moved from the support desk to now supporting people getting up and running. What are the primary things with this school year, at the beginning of the school year, you found that you've maybe had to help people through a bit because of either lack of awareness or pointing them to the right information?
Sure. So I've had people ask me what are the best practices for setting up Apple School Manager, having 2 DEP accounts, one that you're actually using to enroll your devices, and then one that will integrate with Apple School Manager. So I've had that come up a lot, and then also people being very happy that they can now have devices that weren't purchased directly through Apple actually now be integrated into DEP using Apple Configurator 2.5. So that's been really big too. But those have really been the big things that have come up for me this summer.
This summer. Okay, great. Michael, I know Jamf Pro 10 is big in your world. Probably a little off the side of it. Jamf Pro 10, integration with everything. When is planned? Anything new about that we should be aware of?
Yeah, so 10.0.0 got that semantic versioning, 10.0.0, really is that the new look and feel and all of the great functionality you saw today with the self-service enhancements, the patch policies, underlying Apple integrations and technologies, as was mentioned this morning, we didn't actually hold that back. We really wanted to make sure that schools specifically could take an Apple compatibility and new Apple functionality on a 9 series release in the fall, so we weren't forcing 10 on you just so that you could get compatibility. So we've actually been working since the summer through the fall with both the 9.100 and then the 9.101 lovely release numbers, bringing those new capabilities to support. There's continues to be iteration on that roster API, so more information we can use for matching users and generating meaningful class names. There have been a lot of things we've done over the last year we haven't saved for 10. We'll continue to iterate and enhance those. Frank's team keeps building new capabilities for us to pull in for schools to use. But in addition to all of that natural flow of new Apple functionality, I think the tvOS stuff has been really exciting. New Apple TV management capabilities made better in the fall with tvOS 11. iOS, of course, new capabilities. The other thing I wanted to mention, and a lot of people still aren't aware of, it's been around and then enhanced over the past couple releases, is the ability to make meaningful class names and experiences for students and teachers using the Classroom app or shared iPad. Because what's great about our Apple School Manager integration as it's evolved is we've got an increasing number of data points, right? So you've got course numbers and class numbers and sections and teachers. Some of that coming out of your student information system, though, isn't necessarily elegant. Not a great experience to see a long, not so meaningful class name when you launch the Classroom app as a teacher or when you log into a shared iPad as a student. And so we introduced some capabilities where you can actually, using tokens and custom characters, customize the name that is displayed on classes, and then we iterated to add a custom description as well for those classes, some additional text. Both of those can be defined in your global settings for education support. And then on the next time that Apple School Manager syncs, we actually bulk rename all of your existing classes as well. Ultimately, what this means is you can have History 101 or History 101 Mr. Devons instead of History 245-whatever. It's a much more elegant experience for the teachers, for the students, and also, by the way, helpful for IT as you're managing an increasing number of classes. All of that has happened, more capabilities in the future, but some of the highlights that we've been working on recently.
Okay, and thank you. And that actually went in a direction that I have a couple other questions I'd like to get to, but I'm going to stay on that theme. You mentioned the import-export. I know I heard that question from a customer that was having issues with some schema coming out as the classroom, and they desperately wanted to fix that. But what I heard a lot was there's so much customization, and having had I have about 3 gray hairs, and I can name the SISs I managed, 3 different ones, and they were very complex. I can't say that there was a simple integration that we had. What I've heard from customers is even if you have the PowerSchool integration, perhaps, or the Infinite Campus, there's still some complexity and needing to customize things. From the product side, from Apple, where are we at with that? Help, maybe it's a recommendation of what they should be doing. How do you see it, anyways, with your integrations with the current SISs? And for those that don't have an SIS, what do you have for them on what's their best practice or what they should be doing?
Sure. And so I'm going to lean on Steve for a bunch of this too, but what we've done is kind of threefold. One, we try to work with SIS vendors to have an integration at the API level. And we definitely have that with PowerSchool, Infinite Campus, and SunGuard. And if we can't get necessarily the API level, we try to actually work with them on having the SIS actually build out Apple School Manager templates in their SISs so that it makes it easier for them to get the data out of the SIS and into Apple School Manager. Now, some of these partners have actually gone above and beyond, and they can actually send it to us or to really your organization's SFTP bucket, per se, on behalf of you, right? So you put in the username and credentials, and actually that SIS sends over the data on a periodic basis. So we try to actually get to that level. And then finally, of course, we try to actually, if those two solutions do not necessarily work all the time, we actually try to work with middleware companies, folks, integrators, to actually have them help other institutions out there to actually build these formats, build these exports, and actually get them into Apple School Manager. And so we try to do it from multiple fronts. Now, if you actually have an SIS vendor who is willing to work with us, we're more than willing to talk. I know there's a bunch of customers who actually introduced their SIS to our teams, and we actually got some sort of integration done. So if you do have one of those folks, feel free to connect us to them. And the email alias you could use is edu-sis at group.apple.com. And come pick me afterwards and give you the information again. But happy to talk to more SIs for better integrations.
Excellent, thank you. And Steve, from your perspective out there working with schools, those that have been successful, and even perhaps those that have ran into a challenge for what they've come about that they've had to resolve if they've been trying to do the integration with the current SISs that are part of it and those that are not.
So, you know, going back to Frank's earlier point, I think we have a tremendous number of the SISs globally that have already started or completed that integration work. And it's really on a case-by-case basis of what SIS vendor is popular in the US in a particular region or in a particular state. And if they've done that automatic export work, that's the best experience if they're not one of those 3 vendors that Frank already mentioned.
Kelly, from your standpoint, and I know we have the import-exporter tool. I know a customer in Chicago area that is using that very happily. What are you doing or hearing from our current customers that you're helping, you know, sorry, I'm already on tomorrow's panel. Answer that question.
So for those schools that don't have the compatible SIS through Apple School Manager, our SIS importer that we have created internally is a great tool. You just go ahead, you'll download it from Jamf Nation, you'll get that up and running with the JSS conduit, and then at that point you basically say, hey, you need to look to this folder here, this is where you're going to be pulling all the information from, and then you can set it to actually be more automated so you can have it change on a nightly basis if you need to. The only thing is that, unlike Apple School Manager, it doesn't have a way to customize how that information will come in. So you can't say, I want my classes to look really nice and I want them to look this way. It's going to come in just how it is. So there are caveats to using it, but if you don't have anything else, it is a great free option that you could use to get where you need to be.
And what I would add too is we're touching on, I think what maybe makes some organizations anxious about adoption, and that's that there's actually a lot of different pieces here, a lot of things going on, right? We've got student data maybe coming directly into Jamf with the SIS importer, maybe we've got it going up to Apple School Manager in any number of ways. That Apple School Manager integration unlocks different functionality, but even regardless of how data gets in these different places, there's still a place for Classroom even without those integrations. So it really is this choose your own adventure story, figuring out what are the experiences you want to create, which pieces are required or might enhance those experiences. And as Frank mentioned, and as we heard yesterday, like everyone's in a slightly different place, and so depending on where you're at, there is a mix for you, whether that's a complex integration, an elegant integration, a chunk of that experience. So there's not a great one-size-fits-all as much as it can be a really elegant solution for many. Whether that's a classroom experience with the Classroom app, whether that's a shared iPad experience with the whole kit and caboodle, or whether that's just getting a good flow of student data in to enhance your iPad experience. There are a lot of cogs in that wheel, and so it's as much about finding the right mix, determining ultimately what the experience is you're trying to create. So acknowledging that a lot of moving pieces, but there's a lot of options.
Excellent. Now, I only want to ask one more question, so ideally some people will come up to the microphone. Great, we have one already. I'll ask this, and it'll give some people a chance to get up there, and then we'll transition to some questions. Apple School Manager, there's a lot of other parts. I didn't ask one of the questions about shared iPads. I didn't ask who was using managed Apple IDs, and so if there's some people in the audience interested or have those questions, I'd love for you to get in line. Of course, many people used to actually call me the Casper Focus guy, which, you know, I managed Macs for years. I just only got into Casper Focus when I joined Jamf. Great, you know, I won't go into that whole story, but that was a lot of what I was doing. I am thrilled and excited where Apple's gone with this. And then recently, because one of the things I want is I want to have my cake and eat it too, right? I want to be able to have managed classrooms because I believe on a scaling ability, I have to have that as an IT director. I have to have the ability to scale. Giving it to a couple teachers and letting them use it is great. So now, but I also want to ad hoc, because I want to be able to set up the after-school program, and I want to be able to do that. So now you've given us that capability. Frank, where do you see that is now? Where might it be going? How is that working out? I'm actually going to ask all of you to make a comment on it, because it may be to the point of who you see using it, how they're using it, and some opinions around the Apple Classroom and the different ways you could do it. But Frank, where do you see that now? Do you see people selecting one over the other? What do you see with that?
Right. And so Classroom app has gone through a lot of great changes recently and continues to get better. In our newest update, as you can see, we have brought in even more visibility into like what apps students are using in the class and how much time they're being spent on it. And so again, that transparency for the teacher is what we're trying to get at, right? Helping the teacher manage the classroom, really manage the devices so that the students can actually, hopefully pay attention to either the content or the teacher. But in terms of where we see actually a good mixture between, managed classes and ad hoc. A lot of folks have moved to ad hoc because of the flexibility around, customized classes to meet them where they're at, right? And so ad hoc classes, we've seen a huge growth in that realm. And so where it's going, again, we are continuing to make sure that the classroom app is the teacher's assistant. How do we actually help the teacher, again, manage devices in the classroom such that it makes it easier for the teacher to, again, going back to it, help students out. And so you're going to see more, again, transparency, right, in terms of data for the teacher. You're going to see actually more functionality on what the teacher could control in the classroom. And so more things in that light.
Excellent, thanks. Other statements on what you're seeing, who's using which,
Yeah, I think the managed classes are certainly much more popular at the middle and high school level. In elementary, where you have much more dynamic classes that might come together just for a week, for a month, or even just for a couple of hours, those are much more likely to be ad hoc classes. It also depends on how they're sharing, if they're sharing iPads and how they might be doing that.
Okay. From a support or out there talking to our customers, Kelly?
Yeah, so I've definitely seen a majority of my people that I've worked with using managed classes just because it's a little easier to make sure that everything stays on task so you don't have to worry about kids going off and deciding they don't want to be a part of the class. But I have heard of after-school programs actually using those ad hoc classes for kind of like continuing education. That's been really successful.
Okay. And I will admit, when it came out, I heard some people say, great, I won't have to deal with this. But then again, the management side of it, Michael, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, just some like technical commentary for like this audience, right? This doesn't matter as much to teachers, but we started with IT managed classes, which may have been derived from your SIS importer, may have been derived from Apple School Manager, or classes that admins or ed techs were making inside of Jamf Pro. And those sort of centrally IT-created classes are then pushed down in the form of an education profile, and that sort of unlocks, without the teachers needing to do anything, here are your classes, here are your students. If you don't have those classes or you're not using the education support, the education functionality because you maybe aren't using MDM or maybe you're using Jamf now, any number of different situations, if you're not using an education profile, you can actually do the teacher-created classes, and that sort of puts the control in the classroom with some caveats, right? Like students opt into those classes, they can opt out of those classes, so just depending on the scenario and finding the right mix. So again, like depending on the experience you're looking to create, we'll define where the burden falls, if you will, in class creation. Some teachers don't want to have to make those. Some teachers want to make those as IT managed classes, whether that's inside of Apple School Manager to flow through. There's a lot of there's a delegated access story there that's really powerful. Maybe continuing to make classes inside of Jamf Pro, but there are some distinctions in the experience. And so I think it's important to understand how consistent you want that to be versus where you need different experiences. Will help you determine when to make allow that teacher-created class as compared to the IT-managed classes.
Excellent, thank you. And I might come back to it soon. Thank you for your patience. Would you mind you can let us know who you are if you want, or if you want to direct it to a specific person.
I'm Benjamin Vicks. I'm with Moffat County School District. And my question was about how the Apple School Manager integrates with Infinite Campus. We've had trouble in the past with getting Infinite Campus to sync with Apple School Manager. That the Apple School Manager uses an older protocol. Is that likely to be updated, or how do we use the? You mentioned using templates. How would we use those templates, or whether Apple School Manager is going to update the or use both types of interfaces with Infinite Campus.
Yeah. So if I understand correctly, the question was you're having some difficulty integrating between Apple School Manager and Infinite Campus. You're trying the API route, I'm assuming. And so we've actually been working closely with Infinite Campus to make sure that the API routes that we utilize are the most up to date. And so they actually recently provided an update on Infinite Campus, like a few different versions, depending on which edition you're on, of improving the API, if that makes sense. And so we've actually tested with them to be on their latest versions of their interfaces to make sure that our connection with them works correctly. Now, after this panel, I'm happy to show you those versions around which ones we do support, which is given to us by Infinite Campus themselves, and see if those are the versions that you're probably on. And then another tip is maybe working with your SC around trying to figure out if that integration doesn't work, how can we actually help you in different ways as well.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Brian Martin. I'm with Lafayette School Corporation in Indiana. We actually got the full PowerSchool integration working this summer. Previously, we were using the SIS importer to do the job just because, well, I was not able to get all the data that we needed, that Apple needed in the templates to do SFTP. So we were using SIS importer, but when full PowerSchool integration came, I was fairly quick to bite on that. Somebody had tipped me off last JNUC to maybe hold off doing CSVs until the full PowerSchool integration came. I was lucky I did that. I didn't have a painful migration or anything like they had talked about if you were migrating from SFTP to whatnot. And we got everything all up and going fairly well. But there's one thing, and I think it's every AD or directory services administrator's nightmare, and that is what happens when a teacher changes names and what happens when a student, in rare cases, changes names, like a student is adopted. I'd love to maybe hear a workflow, how it goes from being, hey, new teacher name or new student name is declared on the SIS side. From there, how would a good workflow work for name changes?
Great. Anybody want
Are
to
you
take it?
seeing, Brian, right? Yeah. Are you seeing that new data reflected in Apple School Manager, or are you not seeing that new name change come through?
No, I'm not. That's what's interesting is I will see more than one entry for that particular person on the school manager side, and I will end up getting cheesed off and scrub them both out of school manager and scrub it down to the one iPad that they have assigned in the database, and then have to go in manually to intervene and grab it at the next sync and whatnot. I'm playing all kinds of crazy games to get that workflow to finally work and get the kid in that teacher's class.
Good thing you love your students, right?
Luckily, good thing students don't have name changes very recently. I do love my students in general. I try to do anything for our staff and students, but that being said, good thing students don't really change names. What I'm mostly talking about is a whole lot of teachers went and got married over the summer.
How dare they?
Sure.
Yeah, how dare they? Yeah, except for, yeah, that's something relevant. Even I got married to my wife once, so.
So Steve,
Somebody,
Congratulations.
somebody describe that workflow.
So on the name change, it's expected behavior that the name change would flow in from the SIS into Apple School Manager. So you should see that reflected, and then that should also flow downstream to Jamf. For at least the name itself, you know, first name and last name. The user's managed Apple ID, however, would not change.
And see, that's a problem. Like our users like being known by, they want to be known as that D. Schmo instead of D. Smith.
Absolutely. And so the name itself, the first and last name should flow down without issue. That should just happen automatically. Yeah. The reason why we don't change the managed Apple ID is that would potentially require intervention on the device itself of having the user log in and log out, and you wouldn't want to have that happen, you know, just without user intervention at that point. So that's a little bit of the why of what we're doing there.
Steve, is there a path for a student or staff member to update their managed Apple ID? Is that in their control, or how does that happen?
Yeah, so if you wanted to change that managed Apple ID login name, perhaps for a last name change, you could do that as a one-off by just finding that individual record inside of Apple School Manager. Or if you wanted to change the formatting, perhaps because you had misformatted, you know, when you initially started, and you only had a few of those, you know, users rolled out, you can do bulk changes as well. And so that was one of the things that Frank had highlighted at the beginning that we added this past spring.
Okay. I mean, that's essentially what I'm doing is I'll go in for, our curriculum folks will tell me of 1 or 2 teachers that are having a problem, and I'll go identify it and just work through the syncs and the corrections it takes. So yeah, name changes aren't a lot of fun.
Right.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Hi, Dan Miller, Telluride School District, Colorado. We're a small district, about 1,000 students, and we have a 3 through 6 one-to-one iPad program. I took a whirl with the ASM about 1.5 years ago and didn't work out very well, so we went to forgetting about Apple IDs completely, device-assigned apps through VPP. But now we do use PowerSchool, and we're trying to figure out the best way to do identity management and kind of, to some degree, device management. Talk to our Apple guy, and we are currently using ad hoc classes to some degree, but like you mentioned, the best of both worlds, I'd like to do both, managed and ad hoc. And he said that you really can't do ad hoc without Apple IDs, which made no sense to me because we're currently doing it. But the other part is the SIS integration versus ASM. And I still don't see a big need for us to use ASM. And so I'm just wondering, are we better off trying to make the SIS integrator work with PowerSchool? And then the other wild card is that we also have a third-party kind of single sign-on product, identity management product that integrates with PowerSchool and another dozen products that we use, but not Apple. And so I'm like, do I try to integrate Jamf with PowerSchool through the SIS integrator and then let the third-party app take care of everything else? You see where I'm going? It's a complex question.
So I'll tackle the first, because I think maybe I misspoke or I wasn't clear about ad hoc class availability. If a user is in a class in Jamf Pro and you have education support enabled, we automatically generate education profiles under the hood for all of those class, teacher, student associations and deploy those to all of the relevant devices for every permutation, unique per person. And if there's an education profile on a device, if that user and that user's device is a part of a class in Jamf Pro, they are a part of IT managed classes. If there are users that are either not managed by that MDM or not in a class getting an education profile, then they could be used in a teacher managed class in an ad hoc fashion. So sort of 2 different deployment types depending on whether you're using classes and education support on Apple School Manager. Not that that clarifies things, but I just want to make sure I was clear. It's not as much about the Apple ID, it's about the presence of the education profile. But you have a valid follow-up question of then, well, should I use Apple School Manager or not, and why? Valid, and I'll defer on that one.
Sure. And so going back to the other point around, does Classroom app need managed Apple IDs? For either managed or ad hoc, and the answer is no. You do not need managed Apple IDs to get Classroom app running in either scenario, ad hoc or managed. Now, the value proposition for Apple School Manager is kind of like 2 or 3 folds. One is, of course, the device management, but really around, the second thing is around people manager, so managed Apple IDs. Like the value for managed Apple IDs is primarily around privacy. So these students who have managed Apple IDs, we turn off, ads. We don't do, tracking and any of these things. They go to the iTunes store. They can't buy anything, right? We turn on all the privacy aspects around these managed Apple IDs. It also gives you compliance where you can actually log in as that student. If there's a case of cyberbullying or any of these other instances, you can log in as that student and then rectify that course. And so those are kind of like the high-level benefits of managed Apple IDs. We are also going to improve the benefits of managed Apple IDs soon. And so those are all good things. And then finally, the other reason why to go Apple School Manager, which we haven't talked about here, is the volume purchase program. And so the new thing that's coming out for volume purchase program in Apple School Manager is that it's moving from volume purchase program, right, VPP, to Apple School Manager. And the beautiful thing about this is you have a choice. You don't have to migrate if you don't want to yet, but the value proposition is that we made VPP available in Apple School Manager. So the cleaner look. You don't have to log in to VPP every time or you forgot that password. All of that functionality is in Apple School Manager. We also added the benefits of allowing you to transfer licenses to different locations. So you can actually manage licenses on different granularity. So one location versus another location. They can have licenses in different spots now, so you can transfer it between multiple locations. And then, if folks have, let's say, hundreds of thousands of licenses and that are not in use, right? And you want to slim your token down, you can actually move those unwanted tokens to a location and not upload that into Jamf. And so now it actually makes your process of distributing apps to your devices faster and quicker and easier. And so there are benefits to Apple School Manager besides just managed Apple IDs. And so that's coming out very soon.
Awesome.
Yep.
And when we run out of time, I'll invite the people that don't get to come over here and maybe have a few minutes with the panelists as we're wrapping up and getting ready for the next session. But, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Taylor Bell. Is this, yeah.
Hi, Taylor. Finally meet you.
Yeah, that's great. I'm from Maryville University, so we're those higher education unicorns using Apple School Manager and Classroom. So I have a zillion questions, as you can imagine. I'm going to pick this one. When you use the CSV templates to do your upload, so we do it manually, we move our CSVs into our SFTP bucket, and that pushes into Jamf, blah, blah, blah. We force our sync. The problem is, if you need to change something, for instance, a student doesn't have an iPad yet, but we know they're going to be in that class, but they haven't come to campus to do their deployment. It creates a managed Apple ID that you can't manipulate because it's been uploaded through Apple School Manager. So is there anything in the future where in Jamf or in ASM we could edit information that was sent up through those CSVs?
So I don't think that there's a way to attack the problem the way that you're talking about of editing CSVs, but what you could do is you could assign the device to a user inside of Jamf, and then that would achieve the same outcome.
Well,
so
it
if you
needs
know
to
who
be
that
the actual user. The device needs to belong to the user's personal Apple ID because we don't use any managed Apple IDs.
Okay. Yeah, you should be able to. We'll take that offline and take a look at it. Happy to. Okay.
Awesome.
I would just clarify, like, if you're using a shared iPad, that would be a great reason to make sure the managed Apple ID is associated properly with your imported user. If you're not using shared iPad, that might be an ancillary benefit that you may or may not use. You might just benefit from the user flow. So depending on your, again, end user experience, you might not need to worry about the managed ID if they're not using them and if you're not trying to use the shared iPad experience.
It just doesn't allow them to be inside the class when they're not correct. Does that make sense? We'll talk about it afterward. I feel like it's a snowball.
Great. And we'll get to hear some from Taylor tomorrow. She'll actually on a panel of educational organizations during our opening keynote. Clark.
Yes, sir, Frank. My name's Clark Poole. I manage about 25,000 devices, and one of the things that my department has always dealt with is we're on the management and the infrastructure side of the house. However, we're always dealing with our curriculum teams, and I know the Apple School Manager can take and show data kind of instantaneously about what kids were on what apps, but is there any kind of thought or future of being able to take that and look at it from not only a classroom, but the entire school or the entire district and say, hey, you know, our third grade class is really using this app as a whole and we're seeing growth in this grade level. However, second grade's using the same app and not seeing that growth.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for everything and thank you for that question. I love your question. I love data, very much so. And so basically you want to essentially see more reporting around app usage in your district, which is great. Let's just say more is to come. I love, again, like you can imagine where Apple School Manager is positioned, right? Device data, essentially volume purchase data, managed Apple ID. You can see a union of those things. And so hopefully that's enough hints to give you something that's coming, something good.
Thank you,
Great
sir.
question.
Yep.
We might get through everybody here. Yes, sir.
Michael Sanchez with Westside Community Schools. I just have a question about the managed IDs. Is there a particular reason why you can't inspect them via iCloud.com and you have to use a shared iPad?
So I don't believe that you have to use a shared iPad. You could log in on a regular one-to-one, traditional one-to-one iPad and be able to inspect the contents. You could also do it on a Mac, create a new user account and go in that way. But why you couldn't do it on iCloud.com is some good feedback that we can look at.
I'll note it down and investigate why you can't do it. I actually don't know it off the top of my head. So let me go back and figure it out.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Ali Sarahan. I'm from Houston, and I'm the Director of Technology at an independent school. So we're smaller. We don't have 25,000 devices, but that's okay.
It's all good.
So I have a couple of questions. We use Apple Classroom on the devices, right? We also use Apple School Manager, and I hate the managed Apple IDs. I'm just going to be honest about that because I can't track their iPads, and they lose them all the time. With those managed Apple IDs, when the students get ready to graduate from 8th grade and move on to high school, we're 2s through 8th grade. How does that work? Do they just get to take those with them? Do they get shut down when I delete them out of Apple Classroom or out of Apple School Manager? What's that kind of look like?
Yeah, so you definitely can track these iPads, not necessarily the managed Apple ID, but the iPads you can definitely do it in Jamf, right?
Well, it doesn't work reliably.
Are you talking about loss mode?
Yes, it's not
Gotcha.
reliable, especially for the sound part in Jamf. That's just some feedback.
Cool. We can talk after and understand more about what's not working, but maybe for the
Yeah, I know with our past spring release, iOS 10.3, we increased the accuracy of loss mode in addition to adding
Yes,
that
when
sound.
it works, it's accurate, and the sound works, but
You're saying sometimes it just doesn't get the
sometimes
signal.
it'll take the signal and put it in lock mode, but it won't send the sound. And I have checked, and I've taken screenshots, and I've sent them in. It is enabled. It's not user error. But
Yeah, let's- yeah,
that's just, and they are showing on our access points. I can do things like that. But that's not the point. The managed Apple IDs, what do we do there when they graduate from 8th grade?
Yeah, so essentially it sounds like almost like a graduation scenario, right? And so one thing that we announced earlier with Apple School Manager, we want to provide, or we will provide a graduation process where they can move the content off of that managed Apple ID to a different Apple ID.
Okay.
Now, that process is not out yet. It is coming before the school year ends, as we announced before. So that's how the student necessarily moves the data off. Now, what happens to the ID is once the connection to your sys is broken, where this ID is like no longer there, we will move it to an inactive state, and the process will automatically delete it after 30 days. Now, you can choose to switch it and say, hey, don't delete it. I want to move it to manual and keep it around, and that's your choice. So you can actually keep it around if you want to, or let the process eventually delete it, or force delete it yourself. Up to you. Just know once you delete it, it's deleted.
Okay.
So,
they won't lose their stuff. It'll all move over.
they'll have a choice, right, come that time when we
Right.
announce this, we call it graduation feature,
Okay.
to move it.
Great. I think I had one more. So if I were to, we're changing SISs. So we've been with one called RenWeb, which is terribly unfriendly. And we're moving to one called Blackbaud, and we're using their on products. So I'm hoping, I've emailed our rep, and I'm hoping that she'll reach out to y'all to work on an integration. But if we started using that, because right now we use IT-created classes for Classroom, would we be able to make those classes available to teachers to control their students only at certain times? We're on it. I know that's a feature in the JSS, but it doesn't work exactly the way I need it to. So I was wondering if there would be more capabilities.
So all of that time-based functionality is from Casper Focus. And the sort of deploy and undeploy and all of the shortcomings that came with that. So the beauty of Classroom is that it's all proximity, right? So I'm kind of telling their story a bit, but we're off the hook for a lot of complex config profile pushing and revoking. And so the times are there because of our sort of backwards compatibility of classes for Casper Focus, which had that type of functionality. Time has been, I'll be so bold as to say, enhanced by proximity. Whether you like it or not is a different story for your deployment, but it wouldn't apply to Classroom. It's a functionality of the Casper Focus product that does not apply to education profiles or the Classroom app. Anything else you guys would add?
Yeah,
Pretty straightforward.
That's perfect.
We can talk more after if you have more questions. This is a
Okay,
good question.
thank you.
We are at like 10 seconds. I'm going to invite the three gentlemen standing to come up and ask their questions afterwards. Thank you all very much for coming, and thank you to the panel today for their
Thank you.
expertise.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.